Hello, today we're going to go through North Dakota disclosure of agency relationships in a real estate transaction. This is the required form that is mandated that we use according to state law. It is a requirement that we have a conversation with the consumers prior to them entering into a real estate transaction. North Dakota law requires that early in a relationship, and we define that as first substantive contact, that real estate brokers discuss with the consumers what type of agency representation or relationship they desire, unless specified. The term broker, as used in this form, includes both the broker and the broker's salespersons. The available agency options are listed on this form. I think of this as an accountability piece, something that North Dakota requires us to do, and we get signatures to make sure that we have done our job according to the law. It's really important that the consumer knows, per line 4, that this is not a contract. This is in bold lettering. This is an agency disclosure form only. It's very easy to use. The script goes something like this. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, I think it's important for you to understand what type of agency relationships are available to you before you enter into a real estate transaction. North Dakota law requires that I discuss with you the options that you have available. And I'm going to have you sign this disclosure form just to make me accountable to what is required of the law. The very first one here starts on line 8, and this defines what a customer is. A customer is simply a third party to the transaction. A customer is somebody that we do not represent, but that we still have to treat, per line 12, with honesty and good faith, and to disclose to the customer any adverse material facts that are known by the broker which pertain to the title of the real property, the physical condition of the real property, and the defects of the real property. So the script is very simple. Mr. and Mrs. Buyer, right now you are unrepresented. I do not have you under contract. Therefore, you are considered to be a customer. What I owe you as a customer is honesty, good faith, and disclosure of any material facts. If you would like any of your information to be confidential, or if you would like me to put your interests above everybody else's interest in the real estate transaction, I need you to sign a buyer's contract in order to create that relationship. We go on to line 17, which is the seller's broker. So if I have a listing agreement with the seller, I am now representing them and they are now the client. The buyer to the transaction will be the customer if they are unrepresented by myself. So when I'm representing you as a seller, I owe you all of the fiduciary duties, and your interest as a seller is placed to the highest level. Same as if I have a buyer's contract with you. If you're going to be a buyer and I am acting in your best interest, we have a contract together, then the seller is going to be the customer, and you as a buyer will get all of my loyalty, and I will give you all of the fiduciary duties that we will go through on the second page. If I'm a dual agent, that means that I'm going to be representing both you as a buyer and the seller in the same transaction. And if I'm in that situation, I have to share information very carefully because I can't advocate for one party over the other. But I will tell you that I can handle this transaction by doing what is required of me by the law. And what I will do is make sure that if you have any concerns, I will get that in writing and address it with the other party. So for example, if the buyer is asking me why the seller is selling in a dual agency situation, I'm going to email the seller and I'm going to say, Mr. and Mrs. Seller, the buyer is wondering what your motivation to selling is. How would you like me to respond? And then the seller is going to direct us as to how they would like us to respond. The thing to remember with dual agency is we can't advocate for one party to the detriment of the other party. Appointed agency, we do practice appointed agency at our brokerage. And that just is stating that when you take that contract on, whether it be a listing agreement or an exclusive buyer's agency agreement, that means that you are representing that party to the transaction only. I always like to say with appointed agency, there's three players to the transaction. We have the broker, we have the listing agent that is being represented by an agent within the brokerage company, and then we have a buyer's agent that is representing a buyer at the same company. So appointed agency dilutes the risks and the responsibilities and the liabilities that dual agency creates. Now, if you are an appointed agency on a listing, let's say, and the buyer comes through and then you represent that buyer as well, you would be then considered to be a dual agent. The subagent is a agent who is working with a buyer as a customer but represents a seller whose property is listed with a different brokerage. This is why it is so important that we don't take buyers out until we have them represented, because they are technically a customer of ours and we are sub-agents on that listing. With this relationship, we do have some limitations with agency. And the first limitation is what is called the intent to perform. And this just says that we as salespeople must disclose any information to either party which may indicate that one party does not intend to perform in accordance with the terms of the purchase agreement or any other written agreement or obligation. So anything that we know that could affect the transaction, we have to disclose. Also, inputted knowledge simply means the knowledge of one salesperson of a real estate brokerage firm regarding any affected real property is not inputted to another salesperson in the same brokerage firm, and no duty is imposed upon a salesperson in a real estate brokerage firm to disclose facts that are known by that salesperson regarding the affected real property to another salesperson within the same real estate brokerage firm. All of that language means that with inputted knowledge, I cannot be held responsible for any information that another agent knows about a property. So for example, if I have a listing, it cannot be assumed that 5 other agents at our brokerage company have the same information on that listing that I do just because we're working under one roof. Item number C, disclaimer of certain obligations. Unless otherwise agreed in writing, broker and its salespersons are not obligated to a client, a customer, or any other person to discover defects in any real property, to verify the ownership of any real property, or to independently verify the accuracy or completeness of any statement or representation made by any person other than the broker or salesperson involved in the transaction under question. Basically, what that is saying is that if there are defects on the property, our liability to discover those defects is somewhat limited. It is not our job to go outside the scope of what we are licensed to do to discover those defects. However, we do have a fiduciary responsibility. Let's just say that we know that somebody is wanting to buy a piece of property to open a hair salon there, and we sell them property and didn't check on the codes and the zoning. We could maybe be held liable for that because we knew going into the transaction that that was the intent of their purchase and we had to protect their best interest. Agency duties, this is what real estate agency is all about, and this is what we owe our clients. We owe our clients loyalty, which simply means that we're going to act at all times in the best interest of our clients. We owe them obedience, which means we're going to carry on all legal instructions that they relay to us. It means that we're going to follow disclosure. So any material facts that we have knowledge of that are going to affect the property or the transaction and the use of that property, we must disclose. It also means that we're going to practice confidentiality, which means that we will keep all of their information that could put them at a disadvantage confidential. The big pieces to confidentiality are motivation and price. So when you're negotiating on behalf of your clients, it's really important that you remember that anything that could put them to a disadvantage would go against your agency duty of confidentiality. E simply means that we're going to use reasonable care. F, we're going to be diligent. And G is accounting, and that just simply means that we are going to be responsible for money and property and earnest money. I always say the keys fall under the accounting duty as well. We go to line 79. If the seller does not agree to dual agency relationship or an appointed agency relationship, seller may give up the opportunity to sell the property to the buyers represented by that broker. So if I have a seller and I'm going through my listing agreement and they're like, nope, I don't believe in dual agency, I will not allow dual agency, we need to remind Mr. and Mrs. Seller that that limits the buyers that are being represented at our brokerage company from seeing and previewing their property. Same thing with the buyer. If a buyer says that they will not agree to dual agency, it means that we cannot show them property that I have listed within our company. Acknowledgement. I or we acknowledge that we have been presented with the options described on page 1 and 2 of this agency relationship disclosure. We understand that until we have signed a representation contract, we have no representation by the broker, and information given to broker may be disclosed. We understand that written consent is required for dual agency relationships and for appointed agency relationships. And this is where we remind them again, this is disclosure only. This is not a contract for any representation. This is me doing my job according to the law. If they refuse to sign it, make a note of that, date it, and put the time on it, and maybe even make a couple notes as to why they refuse to sign it, and make sure that you retain a copy in dotloop. The very key points I want to point out is that this needs to be signed at first substantive contact. So if you are meeting a buyer and showing them properties for, let's say, 4 weeks before they put a purchase agreement together, we do not want to see this dated at the same time of the purchase agreement, because that means you haven't done your job according to the law. This needs to be signed prior to you taking anybody out to show property. This needs to be signed before you're putting that buyer under contract. It is not that uncommon for this to be signed at the time of the listing agreement, but I do want to make sure that it is signed before the listing agreement. I know in practice we oftentimes are meeting sellers for the first time when we show up to list their property. Those are the important pieces to the disclosure form. I would just practice scripting around it if you are new to the business. And always remember that you can just say it's a requirement of our brokerage. Our broker requires that I have this conversation with you prior to discussing any real estate. I hope that provides some clarity. Any questions? Know you can always ask any of us at the Market Center. Thank you.